Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys!
Hello everyone, and welcome to a somewhat hastily put together episode of the Unwelcome Access podcast. As always, my name is Ross Edelstein, and I am your host. And today, I want to start with explaining what you just saw. So that is from a show called Clone High. I never watched it, but that clip was the JFK clone saying nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys, rather, and then his car immediately flipping over and crashing. I thought that was appropriate because today we are talking about the Kennedys. Now, you might be wondering, Ross, you're a disability podcaster, researcher, whatever. Why are you talking about the Kennedys? Well, it's because of current events, but also not because of current events. Let's start with the impetus of this. So, on the screen, you have a meme I made. It's a comic of the Joker and Red Skull from Marvel. Now, if you do not know, Joker, this is one of the crossover events they did. I don't know much about it, but Joker's DC, Red Skull's Marvel. Red Skull is also explicitly a Nazi, as in worked for Hitler Nazi. You can actually kind of see it in what he's wearing, which has Nazi stuff on it. But and in this, the original, the Joker discovers that Red Skull's a Nazi and is like, whoa, that wasn't just a bit, a gimmick. And Red Skull's like, yeah, you'd be a great Nazi. And the Joker basically says, I might be a psychopathic criminal, but I'm an American. And goes to beat up Red Skull. And in this, I have put the Autism Speaks logo over the Joker and RFK Jr.'s face over Red Skull. Because current events have led to one of the strangest team-ups of all time, so I'm not a fan of Autism Speaks. They have a history of being less than ideal on autism things and basically ignoring the community existing. But recently, as of yesterday, the 17th of April, 2025, for those watching in the future, they put out a statement, or rather, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, an organization I very much support, put out a statement with many of the leading autism-related organizations, ones that I quite like for most of them. The ARC, the Autism Society, which both of those have their issues, but are generally pretty good. Other groups that are also community-led, along with ASAN, not quite as big, but ASAN generally is pretty good with them, and I haven't seen any issues with those groups either. Except also on this is Autism Speaks, which ASAN is basically, again, there's a reason I chose the Joker. ASAN is Batman to Autism Speaks' Joker in terms of rivalry, animosity, etc. And here's Autism Speaks and ASAN signing off on a joint statement against what RFK said. I will have that linked in the description. Basically saying, you have messed up. The fact that I am still not over this development to this moment of recording, but a friend of mine brought up the point, and it's something I've been thinking too. The Kennedy family is rolling in their graves, and it's really most of them, because the Kennedy family has done a lot of really good stuff on intellectual and developmental disabilities. And if you're RFK Jr., this shows just how little humanity he seems to have in him, because he has basically ignored the legacy of a huge portion of his family. Let's get into that, though. So, for the background. Now, on the screen, I have a picture of Boston South Station. There's a lot of Boston pictures here. I figured it would be thematic because Kennedy's, of an Acela in the foreground, so high-speed, sort of curved French train, placed in America, rather. That's in the foreground behind some concrete pillars. And then behind other concrete pillars, there's a bi-level M- MBTA commuter train with a purple stripe and then silver sides. And then another one farther in the background behind it at the station at the platforms. But let's talk about the Kennedys. So to go back, you have to go to the original Kennedy mastermind, Joe Kennedy. Now, there are others who have covered Joe Kennedy in far greater detail. I encourage you to go find that information on your own. But the summary is that Joe Kennedy was essentially a bootlegger who used his bootlegging money to get into power. Now, this is the 1920s and 30s. There's still a lot of anti-Irish and anti-Catholic discrimination. Turns out money can buy a lot of that away. Joe Kennedy was also not a good person at all. A lot of intimidation, very abusive from all reports. Again, there's plenty more to be said on this. That is not super relevant here. What is relevant is his daughter, Rosemary. Now, Rosemary Kennedy, it's likely she had an intellectual or developmental disability. We can't say for certain. Go back to the autism episode, listen to my historical diagnosis rant for more on that. But Rosemary is likely to have had some sort of neurodivergence. When I say this, this is more of a, she behaved in a way that was not normal. Not within the norms that Joe Kennedy expected. And that's really the issue, because Joe Kennedy wanted things his way. He was a control freak from every account that I've read, and that backfired. Well, that didn't really backfire. He was a control freak from all I've read, and that ended up costing Rosemary a lot, for no fault of her own, right? She's just being her, and her dad decides that that's wrong. So this is, I'm throwing in a content warning here. The 1930s, and before there were Asyla. That's going to be a whole episode on its own, but there was a thing, not a procedure, rather. That was the lobotomy. It was essentially you stick the knife in the brain, in the frontal lobe, and you cut it. And this basically destroys a person's personality. It removes who they are and basically makes them more docile, more willing to comply with whatever you're trying to tell them to do, so on and so forth. This was often done on disabled people because they were not complying or not within the norm. That's actually why it was invented. Now we look at lobotomies generally, for most people with a conscience, as a horrific thing. At the time, it was a relatively routine procedure. Joe had Rosemary lobotomized, and it basically destroyed who she was as a person. It completely removed her basically ability to interact with the world. She needed care for the rest of her life. She would have, from all accounts, likely been fine if she hadn't had the lobotomy. If you can't tell, this is not an easy thing to talk about, because this is the past that usually does not get shared when we talk about disability rights. At least in most public conversations. If you're looking for it, you can find it. But in a lot of well-to-do spaces, this isn't talked about. This ended up being something that the rest of the Kennedy family harbored a lot of guilt over. Even if, again, Joe Kennedy was the one who did it, they still had that sort of familial guilt. And the Kennedy guilt actually led to a whole lot of good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move into talking about the obvious one, JFK. Now, this photo is at Providence Station, which is right up in that New England corridor. And you have a photo that is focused in on a concrete pillar that is white on top and blue on the bottom. There is the side of a bridge ramp for wheelchair accessibility on the right, and in the background, sort of blurred in an artistic sense, is a diesel locomotive of the MBTA in purple and yellow and black and gray. Now, this locomotive, this picture is more just to have something in the background. But when we talk about JFK and the Kennedy guilt, JFK did a whole lot around disability and intellectual and developmental disabilities specifically. Now, quick refresher, intellectual and developmental disabilities, oftentimes you think of this as your intellectual disability, autism, ADHD, a lot of neurodivergence is a developmental disability, Down syndrome, etc. It's more of the hoity-toity, fancy academic phrasing for this. Neurodivergence is also thinness, but for academics, intellectual and developmental disability usually describes a lot of the same things, or at least the same disabilities. Now, when Kennedy was elected, this is after the New Deal, which will be its own episode, but the New Deal essentially was a lot of changes for how the American state interacted with the public. One of the biggest programs was Social Security, also topical. But when we're talking about Social Security, we're going back to our models of disability, which I've talked about ceaselessly. It was very medical at the time, and in a sense of, if you don't have a physical diagnosable thing, you aren't really getting that support. Now, Kennedy developed, and I'm not going to say the full name of this commission, but I will link the documentation below, essentially a fact-finding commission on intellectual and developmental disabilities, the first time that anybody had actually done that. And that report basically became the foundation for almost all mental health care and all intellectual disability, developmental disability, autism, what have you services in this country. It is the founding document of that field, more or less. And when I say JFK's wild ride here on this slide, I'm talking about actually the wild ride that when he was assassinated, there was involvement here. Now, I'm not going into conspiracy theory land. What I am saying is that the last two laws he signed, literally the day before he got shot, but the last two laws he signed were essentially developing the research funding for intellectual and developmental disabilities. So there are university centers of excellence on developmental disabilities. They're in every state. Some of them have a couple, but they basically are the sort of knowledge center points. And they're wonderful, highly recommend them. But this was when they were established under Kennedy. And they do a lot of other disability stuff too. But he also expanded Social Security to include mental health care support, as well as provide resources for developing a community mental health care system. And that's closer to what we have today. So the two types of mental health care generally, and there's a whole lot more to be said here. That's going to be a whole other episode. This is very simplified, are residential, aka you live in the place, you get your treatment in the place, things like asylum, but also group homes or inpatient psychiatric facilities, where you're doing your whole experience of living in the one place. And community mental health care, which is a lot of the outpatient stuff. So you go to your doctor's office, you get your prescription for your meds, you get your therapy, whatever. Group homes are kind of in the middle, but this is the simple version. All of that community stuff, which is sort of the gold standard, right? We want people to be as involved in their communities as possible. It's why one of my first episodes was on public transit. But that sort of starts with Kennedy, in part due to this sort of familial connection and guilt based on what happened to his sister. But before we move on into the last couple of slides, I do want to go ahead and hand it over to the mid-roll. Wow, Future Ross, what a great ad. Or maybe there isn't one. As always, our primary sponsor is you, the viewer, over on patreon.com/unwelcomeaccess. However, this space is intentionally left open for disabled people who have a project, a business, something they want to get out there to help platform people who might not otherwise get a chance to share in this sort of format. That said, back to your regular programming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. All right, thank you, Midroll Ross. Let's get into, though, some of the other areas that have been involved with this. So the Kennedy guilt has had a lot of other impacts. So Eunice Kennedy Shriver is the one who's usually pointed at as the biggest champion of addressing what happened to Rosemary. She founded Special Olympics and founded the National Institute on Child and Human Development, which now has her name attached to it. This is sort of within the more for somebody space. Now, these have both developed to do more with and by, and when I say this, I'm referring to the article that will be linked in the description and shared on Patreon. So, on to with to buy is from this article that will be linked and gets into what is the purpose of what you're doing for research. But this goes for all disability stuff, right? Are you doing it for somebody? Are you doing it without talking to them and sort of just being an alien observing people or watching your little ant farm? Are you bringing people as part of the research process but not really giving them any of the control of the final product? Or are you actually incorporating people's perspectives? And as time went on, these programs have done a lot better at actually doing the buy. So Special Olympics, the Don't Say the Slur campaign against the R word, was one of the big leading groups and did it from a very we are supporting you role. And I say this because that is one of the biggest wins that folks with intellectual disabilities have gotten, that has been unabashedly theirs from start to finish, where folks with intellectual disabilities as a group have been the main drivers behind the fight. A lot of the time, it's external advocates as sort of the big names, not the people themselves. But that is one of the ways that this is manifested. The other is Jean Ann Kennedy Smith, who had previously been the ambassador to Ireland. I couldn't think of the name of Ireland for some reason, even though I've worked with the Irish plenty. That said, Kennedy Smith was sort of the person behind the Kennedy Center's Office of VSA/accessibility. This was its own organization for a long time, and the merger happened in the 2000s, I believe 2005, and sort of formally, fully in 2011, even though they basically worked together the whole time. But the Office of VSA originally started as Very Special Artists. It had a name before that, but Very Special Artists started originally. Now, that's kind of a mouthful. Most people called it VSA from the start, and before most places sort of were pushing back against calling people just special, there will be a language episode at some point. But before most of that pushback really ramped up in the early 2000s, the first people who were saying it told VSA, and VSA basically said, okay, everybody's calling us VSA, let's just be VSA. Turns out that worked, and they've been known as such since. Now, they are really good people and doing a lot of work getting people to be a part of their community. Same goes with Special Olympics. Sports are a huge part of it, of community involvement, rather. And both of these organizations have done a really good job of getting people to be an active part of their spaces. Now, one of the big ways that the Kennedy Center's Office of VSA does it is the LEAD conference, the Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability. I've been heavily involved with it for years. So all of this, especially with the Kennedys, does have a personal connection. In fact, you can see me winning the 2023 Emerging Leader Award in Boston, which I did not realize when I put this in there immediately. Even though I knew it, I put this in because it was me winning the award. But at the end of the day, regardless of that connection, I know the work they're doing. And it's getting places to basically say, hey, can we make people a part of our communities fully? And without any sort of, well, there's the special time for special people, ignoring that the needs aren't special, they're just different. But let's get into the last slide I have. This is very much going to be a shorter episode. I apologize for anyone who's wanting a 3-hour rant. So here we're talking about RFK, and RFK less as RFK the individual and RFK the symptom. So on the right, we have a MBTA Green Line car pulling into a station. I believe it's Government Center. I do not like the Green Line. It is very screechy. But this is sort of in an underground tunnel. There's a silver pillar on the right, etc. RFK is more of a story about anti-vax stuff. Now, watch the autism episode. I get into Wakefield and the spread of anti-vaccine propaganda there. I'll probably do a full episode on that, the deeper dive even, but anti-vaccination is a fear campaign, right? At the end of the day, Wakefield's point in publishing vaccine misinformation was to get people to have a reason to buy his vaccine. And getting people to buy his vaccine required them not trusting the one that was in place then. This is one of the reasons why so many people who push anti-vax stuff and who are at the big media space seem to have their own special supplement that will save you, that you can pay them for. Anti-vaccination attracts a lot of grifters to take advantage of it. And the fear around, oh my God, is there something I could have done to make my child's life better, is not bad. Autism, however, is not the end of the world. Now, it can lead to a more difficult being. But it's a spectrum. Watch the autism episode. There are things that everyone can do and everyone can't do. Some things are harder for me being autistic myself. Some things are not harder. But especially in the 90s, you have a lot of fear-mongering around autism. And heck, you even see that now, talking about it as an epidemic when it's really more an epidemic of understanding. But the fear gives people a way to recruit you to right-wing and fascist ideals. Now, when I say this, a lot of right-wing and fascist leaders have hopped onto the anti-vaccine bandwagon. Most of them are not true believers. A lot of them are the same people that you'll see news articles on, well, I went and got the COVID vaccine, but I'm telling you not to. These are opportunists who see it as a means of control and recruitment. Basically, and there are plenty of resources on this around cults, cult recruitment usually attacks people when they're down. And being especially a parent of a disabled person can be stressful and challenging and scary. There's resources, but they're not always easy to access. People will judge you, even if refrigerator mother theory hasn't been a thing for a long time. Go watch the autism episode. Even if it hasn't been mainstream, the underlying current of you could have done something better always seems to stick. And so you look at somebody, especially who might have had to quit their job that they really enjoyed, might not be able to go out with friends as much, is more isolated. It becomes a way to get people involved. You give them something to hold on to that says it's not your fault, and then from that same source you can spread other misinformation. Now, there have been articles that have basically exposed the fascists for saying, well, the left has facts, and so we need to flood the airwaves with lies to counter that, because it's a lot harder to counter a narrative once it's been started. There is nothing but lies behind anti-vaccination, but it's a good way to get control. And RFK, whether he's a true believer or not, and honestly, I don't know some days. But at the end of the day, he is built into getting power. He is far closer to Joe Kennedy than to Bobby Kennedy, his dad. And that's the thing that I think really is apparent here. He is not necessarily doing this whether he actually believes what he's saying or not. It's a way for him to climb that ladder. Whether, for whatever reason, he's really jumped down this rabbit hole. He sees it as a means to the end. He was a successful environmental lawyer. It's not that he's somebody who, again, in most cases, you would have expected to have fallen down this rabbit hole. But for whatever reason, even if he's up there spreading these lies, at the end of the day, this goes completely against decades of what the Kennedy family has done. The Kennedy family has done far more good over the years than most people realize. And a lot of it's being undone right now. This episode is as much a call to action as anything. As I said, I will have the link to the ASAN post, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network post, in my description here. Please go to the organizations that are there. You can choose any of them. I ideally wouldn't want you to choose Autism Speaks, because at the end of the day, this is probably not much like Batman and Joker fighting Red Skull. This would not be a permanent alliance due to the vast difference in beliefs on a lot of other topics. But give to anybody there, or if there's a mutual organization fund that is being done. Fight for the rights of autistic people in your community. Go to community meetings. Go and volunteer. Make connections to get people out into the community who might be in less independent situations, things like day programs, group homes. If you can, do what you can. It doesn't have to be donating a bunch of money or time. But fight people when they try to spread this misinformation. At the end of the day, our job as people is to make the world better for everyone as much as we can. Lying about people, saying that they won't pay taxes, that they won't be able to date. I can tell you one thing, I'm engaged. I also paid taxes on Tuesday. It was actually Monday. Time is hard. I just got done with the conference. But I've done everything that RFK explicitly said in that statement autistic people can't do. At the end of the day, I am proof that it's a lie. At the end of the day, all of you who are listening can help push people to fight the lies where they find them. As always, thanks for listening. I know this is a little bit rushed, a little bit more direct with the times, but let me know if you've enjoyed it. Also, if my audio levels are weird, I tried some new settings. Please tell me that too. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next episode. A huge shout out to the wonderful people over on Patreon who are helping to make this project happen. As always, we aren't getting any ad revenue from YouTube, and we also aren't. You'll also get your name up on the screen right about now, like these lovely people who have helped support the podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to our next episode. Unwelcome Access is a production of Autism, a disability and accessibility consulting organization.